Hey guys, if you want to take your track from sounding like this to this, then stick around for the rest of this video because we're going to look at what plugins and what techniques I've used to make sure that my track sounds good on any speaker. Now, if you're interested in seeing how I've composed and arranged the song, I'm going to post a link somewhere right around here. And you can watch that video and you can see how I've created the song. But if you're interested on how to mix and get your tracks to sound dope, then stick around for this video. So let's get started. The first thing that I've done is I've added a saturator to my kick. I'm giving it about 55% saturation. You can also adjust the pentode and the triode. That gives you different character for your sound. So as the kick comes through, see if I mute it. See, it just makes it a little bit more punchy. The next thing that I've added to the kick is an equalizer. And on this equalizer, I've just used an analog low shelf to boost about 1 decibel, right around 110 hertz and below. The last thing I used on the kick was a transient shaper. And for this one, I just increased the attack a little bit. So that way when the kick punches through, it's just a little bit more punchy. So you can use stock FL plugins for this if you'd like. There's the parametric equalizer for the EQ. There's also the transient processor if you just want to add a little bit more attack to your transients. So if you want to make them a little bit more punchy, FL has all of these plugins. Feel free to use any as you'd like. Next, let's take a look at our snare. What I've done is I've rolled off everything after 200 hertz. So I want to make space in the mix for my kick. So I rolled off anything below 210, and you can see I used a resonant high pass filter instead of using a flat high pass filter. So you can use a flat high pass or a resonant. I like a resonant because this way I can boost a little bit around that 200 range. So you can see here on my kick, I'm actually rolling off around the 250 hertz range. I'm rolling off 1.7 decibels. And on my snare, I'm actually boosting around the 210 hertz range. So this way my snare has a little bit of room. My kick has room as well. The cymbals and hats, as you can see on this EQ right here, I just rolled off on both of them. I rolled off around 400 hertz. This way, again, I'm leaving space in the mix for other instruments. So that way you don't have frequencies competing from different things. So I don't need my hi-hats and my cymbals to be punchy on the bottom end. I want to leave room for my bass and I want to leave room for my kick. Since my cymbals and hi-hats, they don't have a fundamental frequency in the bottom range, but I know my kick and my bass does. Next, let's take a look at how I mix my kick and my bass. I have 3 effects on my 808. I have a fruity wave shaper, I have a saturator, and I have an EQ. The wave shaper is to add some character to that 808 bass. So let's hear it with and without. So that's with it. That's without it. Next, I've added some saturation. So again, the saturation adds harmonics to the sound. So that way it could be heard on different speakers. So if you have a speaker that doesn't have a good response to that 100 to 200 hertz range, then your 808 sub is not going to be audible on it. So your cell phone speakers won't be able to play that 808 sub. This is why I add some saturation, makes it a little bit beefier. And lastly, I added an EQ where I've used a low shelf to boost up about 1.5 decibels, and I actually used the flat high pass just to cut off around 30 hertz. So again, I wanted to leave a little bit of space there for my kick. A lot of speakers can't even play at that 30 hertz range anyway. Additionally, you'll see here, I sidechained my kick to this frequency band right here. So I know my kick fundamentally hits around that 70 to 100 hertz range. So I've done 2 things. I've added a proportional Q filter right here, rolled it down about 5 decibels, made it dynamic, sidechained it to an external sidechain. So if you look down here, my kick is actually sidechained to my 808. So if you're wondering how to sidechain to a channel, make sure you kick on this channel that you want to drive the sidechain. So I'm clicking on the kick, right click down here and say sidechain to this track, which I've already done. Then in my plugin, click on this cog icon, go down to the processing over here, and make sure you have your stereo aux in, or some of them will say sidechain, some of them will say stereo in too. Make sure you've selected that as channel 1 because that's the sidechain channel. So you'll see now every time my kick kicks or my kick comes through, you'll see that band duck down a little bit. And it only happens when the kick is audible. See that? So as you've noticed, all of my drums are being routed to a drum bus, and that drum bus has a single compressor on it. That's all it has. I don't like to compress individual channels, especially if you're using drum samples. So most of my samples are from Native Instrument expansions. Most of those already come processed. So they already add compression to it, EQ to it. So unless you're trying to dramatically change the sound, they already have their own character that the original creator embedded into that signal. So the whole point of the compression on the drum bus is just to glue everything together. The kick, snare, cymbals, and anything else. If you have percussion, it glues everything together. So you'll see I have a very slow attack and a fairly fast release, right? So I wanted to take its time before it starts to compress and then let go of that compression pretty quickly, right? I don't want it to keep it squashed. Secondly, the reason why I'm using the SPL iron is because it has some cool features. I like this air and bass knob right here. When you have that enabled, what ends up happening is it adds a little curve at the top end of your signal and at the bottom end of your signal. So if you think about an equalizer and you start to use a shelf on the top and a shelf on the bottom, it just gives a little bit more bottom end and top end. I like that. After my compression, I'm adding 2 decibels to my output signal, and you can see here my threshold is at 12. So as you increase that threshold higher and higher, it's going to compress more and more. If you look at my signal, I only want to duck down between 0 to 3 max dB out of my signal. So let's play just the drum bus again to listen to that. See here, it's just taking about 2 decibels. That's it. Next, I have all of my strings going to a string bus, so my cello and my viola. Not adding any processing there. I think they sit nicely in the mix, but this way, if I want to bring down just those string instruments, I can do so. I like to use bus channels just to control various groups. So my drums, strings, if I had multiple synths, then I would run them all to a bus. Again, these things make it easier when you're exporting out stems. So if you need to give stems out to a mix or mastering engineer, if you need to give it to a musician, so they recorded a song and they need the stems, it makes it easier when you have a lot of these things grouped and you add all of the processing in that group and they can do the additional touch-ups after. Lastly, on my master, few things. One, I like Gullfoss. So Gullfoss supposedly uses real-time analysis to analyze the signal that is coming through and then add almost like a dynamic EQ to it. So if I say I want to tame it, it does its own dynamic processing on the signal. It's very transparent. It's almost inaudible unless you really drive it. And you don't want to drive it too much. So the whole point of me adding Gullfoss Master on my master channel is just to give those subtle EQs and let the plugin do its thing. So secondly, I use Ozone on my master channel. The dynamics module, that's my multiband compressor. So I have a little bit of compression on my low end frequencies up to about 248. Then my mid up to about 3000, 3.3, and then everything above as my high frequencies. You can set a limiter on each one, compress each one, and then again, dial this in as you would like. Dynamic EQ, again, I have it's essentially a dynamic low shelf. It's called a backsandal bass. When you hit a threshold, it boosts it a little bit. So I have these boosting a little bit. And then on the high end, I'm lifting it, but I'm actually squashing down some of that signal. So you'll see when it plays. So on the top end, you saw every time that threshold is hit, it ducks down some of the signal. On the bottom end, it actually boosts some of that signal. So again, the kick and the bass punch through. Very light EQing because I'm not trying to change the sound. I'm just trying to get everything to sit nicely in the mix. So the maximizer, essentially what you can do is you can set a threshold, and at what threshold it starts to limit the signal, and then also where you want that output to be. So around -1 decibels. And then for me, around -3 decibels, it could start to limit. I like that you can add a soft clipper to it, and it has different textures. So you can use low, mid, or high soft clipping. And then you can have different modes. Most times when I use this, I always set it to modern. Third one that I've used on this one specifically is the God Particle. I personally don't use the God Particle on all my mixes. I find it hit and miss. The amount that you add here, this is, I guess, their secret sauce. It sounds like saturation to me. It sounds like it also does some stereo width processing on there. So this is the God Particles processing. I don't like to drive it too much because it makes it sound too wide for me. And sometimes I just don't like how it sounds when I drive it too much. So I have it around 80%. And then I do use their EQ. I rolled off some of the highs, some of the mids, some of the lows. So let's hear how it sounds with and without. It just gives it that subtle presence, in my opinion. Now, one thing to remember, unless you're making electronic music or instrumental music, you always need to leave space for the musicians to sing or rap on your track after. So if you have a lot of things that are going on, if you have a lot of information, it's going to be hard for a musician to sit in that mix. So always remember to leave space in the mix for a vocalist if you're planning on collaborating with musicians. Now, if you like to watch these kind of tutorials, whether it's mixing tutorials, whether it's beat making videos, then make sure you subscribe to this channel, like this video and share it with somebody, and hit that notification icon. Each and every week, we're gonna drop a video, whether we're gonna be making trap beats, rap beats, drill beats, Afro beats, whether we're gonna be mixing or talking about specific plugins. Again, the whole aim of this channel is to inspire you to go and make some music. Peace.